Welcome to the webinar, Marijuana and Other Drugs of Addiction. Hello, I'm Karen McKelvey, the Coordinator of Webinar Services for PSI. And on behalf of all of us at PSI, we thank you for attending. We are here today to explore the current addiction crisis and how it affects our students both physically and in the educational process. This continues to be an alarming issue that affects all of us as educators and citizens. PSI works with hundreds of students daily in our roles as school psychologists, counselors, school health personnel, educational specialists, and speech therapists. And part of PSI's mission is to support our partner schools and other educators by providing this kind of cutting-edge expertise in response to issues such as the addiction epidemic, the usage of marijuana, and many other extremely complicated problems facing our society in regard to drugs and addiction. So this seminar today will provide an overview of the current marijuana and illicit drug use patterns by local youth. As Ohio leads the nation in overdose deaths, it also provides information about the current drug addiction crisis. As we look towards solutions, the focus is on prevention education, and a program that has been implemented in several local schools will also be described. Our presenter, Nancy Pommerening, graduated summa cum laude from Kent State University with a BS degree in education. She became a teacher for Lakewood City Schools, where she was honored as both Lakewood Teacher of the Year and the Ohio PTA District 11 Teacher of the Year. Her teaching career led to her interest in substance abuse prevention. After retiring from teaching in 2008, Nancy founded the nonprofit Drug Awareness and Prevention Incorporated, which is DAP, with a mission to lessen the demand for illicit drugs. DAP is an Ohio certified prevention agency. In addition to being a professional educator, Nancy is also an internationally certified prevention specialist. As the executive director of Drug Awareness and Prevention, she directs prevention initiatives in school systems, businesses, and local communities. During this presentation, the audience will be electronically muted. If you have questions, use the chat function you can see there to your right to submit any questions you might have. Nancy will answer as many as possible in the time allotted near the end of the webinar. We are recording this presentation for those who couldn't register or attend live. PSI's contact information will be on the last slide. And now, on behalf of all of us at PSI, I'm so pleased to present Ms. Nancy Pommerening.
Thank you very much, Karen. What a nice introduction. I'd like to thank PSI for inviting me to present this information. It's so nice to be here. This is the second presentation that I've done, and I appreciate the opportunity. So let's get started. I'd like to start today by telling you that much of the information of what we know about usage patterns among youth comes to us from the National Institute on Drug Abuse. They provide this information through student surveys, and the most extensive one is done through a program called Monitoring the Future. Monitoring the Future is a survey that has been done for many, many years, and it's a rather extensive survey. Overall, almost 45,000 students from 382 public and private schools participated in the 2015 survey. We have also done the survey in 2016 and 2017, but the results haven't been totally evaluated. The 2016 survey is out, and from what I have been able to see, the results have changed a little, but not significantly in regards to marijuana use. The trends are somewhat positive, but haven't totally changed significantly. I'd like to have you take a look at this chart in front of you. It is a trend line for approximately the last 20 years. The one that's going to jump out at you is the chart in the middle. cigarette use is down significantly, and it has been a long, long battle to bring those numbers down. It is a campaign teaching kids about the dangers of cigarette smoking and the effects of tobacco smoke on the overall health of the body and the lungs. We haven't been as successful in bringing down those numbers of alcohol use, as you can see. And what's most puzzling of all is, in spite of all the work we've done on talking to kids about the dangers of illicit drugs, we haven't had great success. Now, we have had success in some areas. I will show you, as you can see from the numbers below, that usage rates go up as kids get older. You'll notice that we survey kids in 8th, 10th, and 12th grade. And as the kids get older, they become even greater risk takers. I'd like you to now take a look at this slide. You're going to see one number jumping out at you way more than any other, and that's that purple line in the middle of the chart. That is marijuana use. It's rather shocking to me that about 1 in 3 12th graders have tried marijuana in the past year. Doesn't mean they're continuing to use it. It just means that they have tried it. And if you look at that little pill bottle to the right, you're going to see that there has been a significant decrease in opioid use among youth over the past 5 years. So I would like to say, yay, at least we're making progress there. Kids have significantly decreased experimentation with prescription drugs. However, that purple line, that marijuana line, is very concerning to me. And if you look at the second line from the bottom, from the top, Adderall use is significantly increasing among seniors and college-age students. Our students are beginning to believe that Ritalin and Adderall use will give them an edge as they prepare for exams and study. This is a significant increase that we're seeing in the 2016 survey of use among youth. Let's take a little further look. Specifically, this little map that I'm going to show you here is specific to Cuyahoga County, but I can assure you that the trend lines are very similar across northeast counties in Ohio. The reason I show you this map is to show you that the surveys that we do can be very specific to a population of a region. And if you contact local groups that do surveys in your area, you may be able to get similar information for your region. In Cuyahoga County specifically, I'd like you to take a look at the third line down. In 2015, in Cuyahoga County, in the past 30 days, 1 out of 5 youth have been using marijuana. This is a rather high number. And the reason it's a high number is very significant. But before I get into that, I'd like to share one more resource with you. This is a phenomenal piece of information that you can have access to very easily. If you look in the lower left-hand corner of the screen, and as you know, this will be available to you online, the Ohio Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services publishes a document called an OCPS. And what it is a snapshot look at what each region of Ohio is noticing in terms of which drugs are coming into the region, which drugs are on the upswing, which drugs are available, and what we're seeing in our region. If you're from Akron and Canton, for example, take a look at that second arrow, that orange box there. Illicit prescription opioids are becoming less and less available. If you are from the Cleveland region, you're going to see that heroin, marijuana, and illicit Suboxone, which is used to treat heroin addiction, are increasingly available. It's just a nice, quick snapshot at what's happening in your region. And I would encourage you to go to that website. The easiest way to get there is to go to mha.ohio.gov, and in the search box, type OSAM, and it will lead you right to this page. It's a great resource if you would like to know what's happening in your region. But let's get back to today's marijuana, because this is becoming an increasing concern in our community. And yes, indeed, we are learning to grow a better bud. This is what's becoming increasingly alarming to folks in the addiction services business. This is really kind of puzzling. I'd like to read this to you. 68% of high school seniors do not view regular marijuana smoking as particularly harmful. And in the recent 2017 Monitoring the Future results, we have discovered that non-college graduates, approximately 12%, smoke marijuana on a daily basis. College graduates, the number is much lower. It's in the 5 to 6% range. However, 71% say they disapprove of regular marijuana smoking. But that top box is extremely important. They don't see a harmful effect in marijuana smoking. And this is why you are seeing the statistical increase in marijuana smoking among youth. And this is why it's concerning. So let's back off a little bit and find out what marijuana actually does. We all know the nicknames. We all know the supposed intended benefits. It can relax you. It's creating euphoria. The actual chemical, and by the way, cannabis contains over 400 chemicals. 400 chemicals. But the one that kids like is the one called THC. The actual chemical is delta-9 tetrahydrocannabinol, and it is the most common illicit drug used in the United States. The effects: it alters mood and perceptions, it impairs coordination, creates difficulty in thinking and problem solving, and it does disrupt learning and memory. A recent study coming out of Sweden, a 20-year study, concluded that it actually can cause IQs to drop an average of 8 points. And those of us that are educators know that if we are in the high end of that scale, if we're in the 130 to 140 range, maybe we can afford to lose 8 points. But if we're at the low end of that scale, that is a significant drop. And the addiction rate is approximately 9 to 10% of the general population. However, if you begin smoking weed as a youth, a teenager, the addiction rate increases to 16%, a significant difference. I'd like to read this line to you because this is the part that scares many adults. A law enforcement explained that most kids today don't really know what they're getting when they're purchasing marijuana because it's oftentimes laced or dusted with other products to increase the hallucinogenic effects. The drug dealers want them to come back and buy their product. And right now, we're finding on the streets that some of the dealers are dusting it with heroin and cocaine. Kids are taking drug tests for works, and they're coming back with a positive result for heroin, even though they swear they were only smoking weed. And this is happening across our region right now. And parents and adults and educators need to be aware of the risks. The kids aren't just smoking marijuana. But it gets even worse. I don't know the ages of my audience, but I do need to tell you something really important. Back in the swinging 60s and 70s, when we were having the hippie generation, the average THC level of marijuana was about 2%. Take a look at this chart. The average THC percentage today approaches 13%. And if you're out in Colorado, they've increased it to about 17%. For those math teachers that are listening to this presentation, that's like what, a 700% increase, 600%? We are talking about an extremely powerful drop. The high is much different than what it was in the 60s and the 70s. These kids are getting extremely high. But that's not even the whole story. Take a look at this one here. Hashish oil is extracted from the marijuana leaf. This is not the bud. The way that this was explained to me by the law enforcement folks that I know is I want you to imagine taking a blowtorch and blowtorching the marijuana leaf. What that does is it releases the oils within the leaf. When you get that oil out, it's much more concentrated. The hashish oil levels are even higher than the marijuana leaf. And you can see that if you're using hash oil, instead of just smoking the bud, you're getting even a stronger level of THC. But it gets even worse. I want you to take a look at this picture. If you look in the upper right-hand corner, that's kind of what hash oil looks like. It comes out of this gooey, sticky tar-like substance, but if you let it dry and it becomes even thicker and more concentrated, it almost looks like a wax. And if you look in the lower right-hand corner of your slide, you'll see something called shatter. Shatter actually dries almost like glass so that you can break it into pieces. So when you hear kids talking about dabbing, what they're actually doing is they're taking that stuff and they're breaking off a small piece. At this point, the THC concentrates are at an 80 to 90% THC level. When you smoke this stuff, you're smoking the equivalent of heroin and cocaine mixed together. This stuff will get you really high. I want you to understand something though. Kids are technically correct. You will not overdose on marijuana. You will not die from an overdose. However, you just might have such a hallucinogenic trip that you may think you can fly. You may jump off the balcony of a building and think you can fly. This stuff is extremely dangerous. So if you hear kids talking about dabbing, this is what they're talking about. They take that stuff and they stick it on the end of a pipe and they light it and they smoke it. That's what we mean by dabbing. Dance dabbing, dabbing in terms of marijuana. This is why I want you to be aware of what marijuana is today as opposed to what it was 30, 40 years ago. What are the signs and symptoms of marijuana smoking? Euphoria, relaxation of inhibitions. Again, the munchies it's true, you do get the munchies, and that's why there are medical properties, which we'll get to in a moment. Poor coordination. Yes, this stuff stinks. It really does smell like skunk. You will smell it. You will see a marked reddening of the eye, which is pretty hard to tell. And of course, I've already mentioned addiction. This is the big question I get. Isn't marijuana illegal under federal law? Yes, it is illegal under federal law. But on August 29th of 2013, the Department of Justice issued what was called the Cole Memo. And I've given you a link there on the right if you'd like to look this up for yourself. Basically, what the federal government said is we're going to keep our hands off of states that have decided to make marijuana legal in their states. However, you better come up with laws that are strong and effective and address any threats to public safety, public health, and make sure that you're protecting people. And it better be effective in practice. That was the kind of under the table, we'll leave you alone, but. So what happened? Did it work? 4 years later, a group called SAM, and this is a great group if you're interested in what's currently happening in marijuana. Just look up SAM and you'll find them. They decided to take a look at how things were going, and they issued what they called the Cole Memo report card. And the main reason I mention this report card is because of the top letter grade F, preventing distribution to minors. What we discovered is in states where medical marijuana and recreational marijuana is legal, they've done a pretty horrible job of keeping marijuana out of the hands of youth. In every state where marijuana is legal, youth rates of use have increased above and beyond the rates at which they've increased where marijuana is not legal in any shape or form. So I wanted you to be aware of this because medical marijuana is indeed coming to the state of Ohio. I share this map with you as of November 10th of 2016. We have about 7 or 8 places where recreational marijuana is legal. We also have several states, including Ohio, where medical marijuana will become legal soon. In fact, if you take a look at medical marijuana, it's an interesting case all by itself. The FDA has currently approved a few drugs where they have taken the properties of marijuana and they've isolated the ones that actually do have medical uses. Those uses are to treat nausea and to boost appetite. And I gave you a few points to remember that I took right off the NIDA website, and I gave you the link down there below. So if you're interested in sharing this with students, if we have any health teachers among us, if you're interested in sharing this with students, it's kind of an interesting thing to look at. I know that many young people will tell you that there is a strain of marijuana called Charlotte's Web that helps young people that have seizure disorder, and it is true. There is an ingredient called cannabidiol or CBD that does help with that seizure disorder. The problem with all forms of medical marijuana is they haven't really been tested to the degree that most medicines that we currently use. And I want you to look at bullet point number 2 on this list. The FDA has not recognized or approved the marijuana plant as a medicine. Remember what I told you. Marijuana has over 400 chemicals. It's rather difficult to understand that you're putting 400 chemicals into your body and try to call that a medicine. However, I do think that marijuana deserves to be tested, and we need to look at those 400 chemicals and determine if any of them can be used to treat disease. I think that needs to happen, but I think it needs to happen under the FDA rather than just by states saying, hey, let's legalize it. That would be my personal bias, and I say that freely. So it's an interesting thing, and we're going to have to wait and see what happens. But it is coming to Ohio. The law will fully be in place by September 8th of next year. A couple of things you need to know about that. First off, you won't be allowed to grow it at home. Secondly, you won't be allowed to smoke it. You'll have to take it either in chewable form or by a patch, most likely. However, you need to understand that DFWP refers to drug-free workplace. Just because medical marijuana will become law does not mean that your employer will have to allow you to use it if you have a medical marijuana license. If your doctor prescribes it, that's great, but that doesn't mean that you will be allowed to use it at work. Ohio is an at-will employment state. What that means is your employer gets to decide if they will allow people with medical marijuana to work in their place of employment. It's kind of like the Cleveland Clinic has decided they will not hire people who smoke cigarettes. There will be 20 qualifying conditions, 40 licensed dispensaries, and 20 growers. Physicians will have to become licensed, and what's interesting is they've surveyed doctors, and about 30% of Ohio doctors surveyed have said that they would recommend it. 70% have said they will not. So we'll just kind of have to see how this plays out. Stay tuned. We'll have to see what happens. The results coming in from states where it is legal are becoming increasingly interesting. For example, in the state of Colorado, accidents as a result of drivers that are high have increased. We're seeing more and more instances of children who are accidentally ingesting brownies that are laced with marijuana, ending up in emergency rooms. There have been some problems with it. So we're just going to have to wait and see how it plays out. All right, that's pretty much what I have to say about marijuana. I'd like to get on to a few other drugs of abuse that are out there, just briefly touch on them, and also do a brief review of the opiate-based drugs for those of you that were unable to attend the last seminar that I gave, because it's such an important topic. I'd like to start with a rather interesting chart, and I know this is very confusing. So what I'd like to tell you is I'm sharing with you a chart from Cuyahoga County of overdose deaths from the year 2006 to 2017. And that goldenrod orange one on the top is projected deaths for the year 2017 at the very end. Our Cuyahoga County medical examiner, Dr. Gilson, believes that we will top 800 overdose deaths this year as a result of all drugs. I suspect that in your counties, while the number may not be that high, the trend lines will be very, very similar. I'd like to focus your attention first on the dark blue line. The dark blue line is heroin. I'd like you to follow along with me from 2006 to 2015. You're going to see a generally upsloping line. From 2015 to 2016, that line takes a really sharp increase. Look what happens from 2016 to 2017. That dark blue line goes down. Good news, right? Well, kind of yes and kind of no. Take a look at the red line. The red line is fentanyl, which is a drug way more powerful but similar to heroin. Fentanyl is kind of flatlining until you get to 2013. From 2013 to 2015, it's on an upswing. Look what happens to it, though, from 2015 to 2017. It just takes off. And if you compare the orange and the red line, I think you can see what I'm alarmed at. Our drug addicts have switched from heroin to fentanyl because the dealers have discovered that addicts that can no longer really get high on heroin are switching to fentanyl. And the overdose deaths are tracking right along with them because it is such a powerful drug. The other last interesting thing I'd like to point out to you is that greenish colored line. That's cocaine. We're becoming increasingly alarmed that since 2015, cocaine is also on the rise. And the other scary thing my friends in law enforcement are telling me is the dealers are starting to lace cocaine with fentanyl. So it's just a few trends that I wanted you to be aware of. It's happening in all counties, not just Cuyahoga, but this is the only chart that I was able to acquire. I'd like to talk just briefly about drugs in general. Psychoactive drugs are loosely classified into 4 categories. Stimulants, drugs that lift you up. Depressants, drugs that slow you down. Antipsychotics are generally drugs that are prescribed by psychiatrists to help the folks that are having mental disorders. And hallucinogens that are taken by folks that just want to have some type of psychedelic trip. Those are the, loosely speaking, 4 categories of drugs. I'd like to talk briefly about the depressant drugs that are opiates. Generally speaking, the perceived benefits are euphoria, but they were actually created in the medical community for pain relief, and they were originally intended for end-of-life pain. And this is the #1 drug that is used in our country. About 90% of prescription drug abuse is the opiate-based drugs. The second class would be the benzodiazepines that are also abused in the addiction community. So how do we get in this mess that we're in? Why are opiate drugs being abused at the rates they are? It kind of started in the 90s when society started to believe that people should never be in pain, that everyone should be pain-free, and we believed that medical miracles should create a pill for everything that was wrong with us. Everybody should be fine. So, of course, doctors started prescribing, and some started over-prescribing. And then the pharmaceutical community decided that they could get rich. If they just kept pushing these pills and doctors kept prescribing, everything would be great. Well, all of a sudden, people started to realize that these drugs actually were addictive. For a while there, we were convinced that they weren't, but they were. So when we started pulling back and not prescribing so much, folks that were addicted had no choice but to run to the streets and start using the illegal forms of the drugs, like heroin and fentanyl. The other problem that I'd like to throw in here, because it's always there, is mental illness. About 40% of our population takes drugs or uses alcohol to self-medicate. When you mix all that together, it was the beginning of a crisis here in the state of Ohio. And I'm sorry to say that we still haven't quite solved the problem that we're experiencing here. We've tried some things to help, but we're still not all the way to a solution. I'd like to share one slide with you to help you understand the difference in potency of opioid-based drugs. if you have a major surgery or you are having a, shall we say, end-of-life disease such as cancer, or if you have serious pain from back injury, chances are good that you may get a very serious medicine like morphine in the hospital. An addict that uses heroin is taking something that is twice as strong as morphine. But now that we have drug dealers who have introduced fentanyl on the street, it is 50 times as powerful as heroin. I think you can see now why from that chart, overdose deaths have skyrocketed. But it gets a little worse. The drug dealers, for some reason that I just don't understand, have gotten their hands on carfentanil, which is elephant tranquilizer. This stuff is extremely, extremely dangerous. In fact, you've probably heard a few news stories of officers that have maybe brushed themselves with 1 or 2 grains and almost overdosed. This stuff is unbelievably dangerous, and it is 10,000 times as strong as morphine. And the drug dealers are, in fact, mixing it with their drug. In fact, I was talking to Dr. Gilson, who is our medical examiner in Cuyahoga County, and of those deaths that you saw on that chart, in Cuyahoga County, 61 people have died of a carfentanil overdose this year in Cuyahoga County. But this is a very graphic representation of the difference in potency in our opioid-based drugs. All right, so how would you know if someone was using heroin? I will tell you it's very difficult. I had one woman tell me that her husband was using heroin for 2 years before she finally figured it out. It is very difficult to tell in the early stages. But here are some of the things that you might notice. They're constantly nodding off. Sometimes their speech is garbled. They just kind of sit around and don't want to do anything. They're no longer interested in favorite activities. And I've been told they are the best liars ever. They can tell you stories and convince you that nothing is wrong. They stop caring about hygiene, don't care about their physical appearance. They withdraw from friends and family. They like to be alone, and they wear long sleeves in hot weather so that you can't see the track marks in their arms. I'd also like to point out that folks that are using heroin can be revived with a drug called naloxone. It literally reverses an overdose. And even though I have shown you clinics where you can get naloxone for free in Cuyahoga County, if you are in a different county, all you need to do is do a simple Google search for Project Dawn and type in Project Dawn, Trumbull County, Project Dawn, Summit County, and they will come up with a list of places where you can go to be trained. And the reason this is so important is because in 2016, 8 people died every day of an overdose. And I'd like you to remember that you can reverse overdose with naloxone. Last one I'd like to talk about is amphetamines because they are making a comeback. Amphetamines can be extremely dangerous. They are highly addictive and can cause arrhythmia. The positive perceived benefits are that they increase alertness and mental focus, which they do. Ritalin is an amphetamine. They can give you increased energy and euphoria. Used to be prescribed for weight loss, but no more because of their danger. In the end stages, they give you enhanced feelings of power and control. But I did want to cover that because many of our students who are on Ritalin and need Ritalin will not have these effects if they're under the prescription of a doctor. But folks that abuse them will have some of these effects. And of course, the hallucinogens that are club drugs, as I call them, PCP and ecstasy, pretty much mimic the effects because they are a stimulant, but violent behavior is possible. Kids will have high body temperatures and extreme sweating. These are symptoms that you might notice in a classroom if they come to the classroom high on ecstasy. Last, I want to mention synthetic drugs. They're not as popular as they once were, but these used to be sold in head shops, and these are extremely dangerous for kids because they're a combination of chemicals that were meant to mimic the effects of marijuana. And I do want to tell you they are extremely dangerous. If you see anything that looks like this, they almost look like potpourri, or they look like little packages of tea. You need to treat them very carefully because they are extremely dangerous drugs. and kids can get extremely sick using these drugs. I wanted to show you a couple pictures of eyes. These are examples of kids that are either on heroin or taking diet pills. The pupils just look unnatural, and I wanted to make sure to share with you a couple pictures of eyes that you might see. I'd like to finish off this discussion quickly by going through a few slides of what addiction is and how addiction happens. Starting out with the pleasure principle, and I think you can read this as well as I can. The brain is built to repeat any behavior that stimulates the reward center of the brain. If it feels good, it must be good for me, and it must be repeated. My favorite example is 1 chocolate chip cookie, good. 2 chocolate chip cookies, better. 6 chocolate chip cookies, wonderful. And this is exactly how the brain thinks. The pleasure principle wants you to repeat and stimulate behavior that feels good. So that leads to the question, why do people take illicit drugs? And there are a variety of reasons. Some take them to feel good. Drugs do produce pleasure. Some people to feel better. About 40% are trying to self-medicate to relieve anxiety or depression. Some take drugs to do better. Oops, sorry about that. Let's see if I can reverse this. Let's see if I can go back. Uh-oh, I'm going the wrong way. There we go. Sorry about that. Some take drugs to feel better. Some takes drugs to do better, to enhance performance. And of course, our youth population takes drugs because they're curious. They want to do it because others are doing it, and they want to know what it's like. Those are the 4 main reasons why people take illicit drugs. So what exactly happens in your brain when you take drugs? I'm not going to try to teach biology because I'm not a biology teacher. I was a history teacher. But I show you this slide to let you know that drugs actually hijack the information highway in your central nervous system. And in that synapse between nerve cells, that's where drugs do their dirty work. Right in that synaptic knob is where the action takes place. Let me see if I can show you on this next slide. You don't have to understand a lot of biology to understand this. If you look at the slide on the left that shows my chocolate chip cookie or food, those little orange dots are the dopamine that gets released in that system when I eat a chocolate chip cookie, and it makes me feel good. When you use drugs, look at the amount of dopamine that gets released. Huge amounts. But in addition to getting released, something else happens. Generally speaking, when you get a good feeling naturally, that dopamine gets released, and then it gets sucked back into the nerve cell. When you use drugs, not only does it get released in huge amounts, it doesn't get sucked back in, it gets trapped in there for a long period of time. Now, that's a very simplistic explanation, but it's enough to understand why drugs overstimulate the nerve system and make drug addicts feel that intense euphoria or pleasure. But you need to remember that unending pleasure is impossible to sustain forever. And every time an addict gets high, the level of pleasure decreases just a little bit. And by the time they've reached 2 to 3 years into that addiction, they're not feeling that intense pleasure anymore. It's a little less, and it's a little less, and it's a little less, so that by the time they're reaching that 2nd and 3rd year, they're not really getting high anymore. They're just taking that drug to feel normal. But it does interact with the reward system of the brain and chemically changes the brain. And I'd like you to listen to this sentence. I hate to read slides, but this is the most succinct way that I've come up with to explain addiction. At some point, the brain no longer produces the neurochemicals that produce pleasure. The brain relies on the drug chemicals to do that. At this point, the only way to feel normal is through the drug. Addiction is a disease that changes the brain. So guess what? You don't take the drug, no dopamine gets released in your brain, and you don't feel good because the brain has stopped producing it. The only way to feel good is to take that drug. That's why people keep repeating that behavior. The brain has stopped helping you to feel good. You need the drug to feel good. And that, in a nutshell, is what addiction is. A chronic relapsing brain disease that is characterized by compulsive drug seeking and use despite the harmful consequences. And that's what kids need to understand. And I wish I could tell you who becomes addicted. It's a combination of factors that you mix together: environment, biology, and outpours addiction. It's really hard to predict. Obviously, the more risk factors you have, the more likely you are to become an addict. And what you should do if you're concerned, the big thing you should do is ask. If it's a family member, start talking about drugs and alcohol. If it's a student that you're concerned about, ask them if they need help. That's what you do. You refer them to the counselor for help. And there's a great book called an intervention ebook that you can also look at that might be very helpful. What is the process of treatment and recovery? It's really quite extensive. It's worth going through, and I will tell you that most folks go through it many times before it sticks. Detox, repairing the body, learning to live without the drug, and then once again growing as a human being. If you're interested in where to turn to for help, I highly recommend calling 211. It's a great resource, and of course, PSI Solutions is obviously where I would turn to first if I was looking for guidance of any kind, and I think they would be the first people I would call if I was looking for help. So what are we going to do about this problem? Where do we turn? What do we do to solve this problem? I'm just going to run through some very quick solutions for you, things that I think we need to be doing as educators and as a society. First off, that's me. That's me when I was a teacher in a classroom. And what got me started on this whole process was this letter that I received from a student in the 8th grade. And just real quickly, I'm going to highlight the green boxes. This is P, about my mom. She's addicted to cocaine. She asked me to take this pill with her. And I will tell you, this just rocked me off my chair, that a mother would use her son to get high with her just absolutely appalled me. And it made me realize that it was going to be very difficult for me to teach kids when there was this white elephant in my classroom. How do you teach kids when they're going home to this, when they're dealing with parents who are addicts, encouraging them to use drugs? I realized that unless we as educators became involved in this issue, it was going to be very difficult for kids to learn. And that's what got me started on this second career for myself. And I became a prevention specialist with a very important mission. I knew that there was no way to stop this thing unless I could reduce the demand for illicit drugs through education and other prevention strategies. And that's what I set out to do. And I'm very happy to tell you that in February of this year, the Ohio Joint Committee on Drug Use Prevention Education came up with a list of things that they believe are very important. And number one on that list was kindergarten through 12th grade substance abuse prevention education, with required reporting from schools on what they were doing to prevent substance abuse. And I loved number 5 because number 5 was actually asking schools to come up with substance abuse curriculum across subjects. And they mentioned the program that I highly recommend, which is the Brain Power program from the National Institute on Drug Abuse. And those of you that saw my last webinar heard me talk extensively about this program from the National Institute on Drug Abuse that our organization, our agency, trains teachers in. It's a great program, 5 to 8 class periods a year, easy to integrate. Classroom teachers can do it in science or health, can actually be brought anywhere into the curriculum, and we can train you in a couple, 3 hours, and then you own it forever. It's just a wonderful program, and you can contact me later if you're interested in talking about it. A couple other things that I think are important that we as a society do. I don't think we can stop arresting drug dealers. I don't think we can ignore the fact that what they're doing is pushing a dangerous product on our youth. I saw this map and I was shocked. This is just the State Highway Patrol and the arrests that have taken place in 2016. So I think we need to keep up with enforcement. I think we need to keep watching people and how many prescription opioid drugs they're getting. And I'm happy to tell you that there's been a 20% decrease in opioid prescriptions since 2011. That's another good thing that's happened. I think the medical community is working really, really hard in treating people. They're using medically assisted treatment plans now to help folks that are addicted get off this stuff. I think that's really important. Overdose, I already talked about naloxone and Narcan. You can go to these places and get a reversal of overdose if there's someone in your life that is addicted to heroin, to try to keep them from overdosing and dying. I think that's important. Drug courts, instead of locking people up and putting them in jail, I think it's important that we help them get clean. And this is kind of a forced way to get clean, but apparently it's working really well. The recidivism or rearrest rate is down to 8.4% in Cuyahoga County. That is just phenomenal. We're helping people get their lives back. I think that's really important. And all of us can do something. We can do drug-free workplace programs. We can encourage people not to drink and drive. And of course, we can do education programs in our schools. And we can also work with parents. I think we need to remember that there are parents out there that want to help. Our organization has put together a booklet called What Are the Drugs in Your Child's World? And we have tips for what parents can do at every age, tips that parents need to understand about modeling healthy behavior, enforcing rules at home, spending time with their family. I think we need to encourage parent programs whenever we can, work with our PTAs and parent groups. That can help a lot. And last but not least, I think it's important, all of the programs that we have from PSI, other places that help us to teach coping skills and finding alternatives to artificial enhancement. I think these are also fabulous ways to build a healthy lifestyle without turning to the alternatives, which can be drugs and alcohol. And I think I'm pretty close to my 45 minutes, Karen, that you asked me to stick to. I think that's it. I think I'm ready for questions. Karen, are you there?
Sorry, we were having to switch over the microphone here.
Okay. I'm pretty close. I think I talked over by 2 minutes, but I kept it pretty close to 45 minutes.
No, that's fine. We
Great.
have gotten some questions come in. The first one is, how will Ohio's new medical marijuana laws impact our youth? And in your opinion, will usage rates go up?
Well, that's a very interesting question. I can only base it on what I've seen from states that have adopted medical marijuana laws. I am sorry to say that I think it will have a negative impact on our youth. In states where medical marijuana laws have passed, youth usage rates have indeed gone up. It sends a message to kids, first off, that because it's a medicine, it's probably not dangerous, which means that it's safe to use, much as we experienced with kids experimenting with other prescription drugs. I think we're going to have a huge education job on our hands, and all of our teachers out there that are listening, you're going to have a huge education campaign on your hands to help kids understand that marijuana is not safe to use. And I also think in conjunction with that, there's going to be a huge campaign to help folks understand that it's not going to be safe to drive after using marijuana. If you will take a look at the statistics that we have found coming out of states like Colorado, Washington, and California, youth usage rates are going to go up.
Okay, thank you. Another question about that brain power program that you described. Why do you think that is a better solution possibly than other programs that are out there, other kinds of prevention programs?
The reason that I think it's, excuse me, a little bit better of a program is because the implementation is more accepted into schools by administrators, mainly for two reasons. First off, it correlates with the science and health curriculum, which means that you don't have to find a special place to put it in. That's the first reason. And the second reason is that it can be taught by the classroom teacher as part of the science or health class, which means that there's not a huge expense in bringing it to the classroom. It makes it very cost effective. It integrates because it also teaches science and health standards that are already required by law, which means that you're kind of like killing two birds with one stone. So the kids are already getting required curriculum. You're just teaching it a slightly different path, and the time requirement. You're talking 5 to 8 40-minute class periods. It makes it a little easier to fit into the curriculum. That's one of the main reasons most school systems really seem to like it.
Okay. Somebody else was also interested, as you were speaking just now. They wanted to know how expensive would it be to bring brain power to their school?
It's relatively inexpensive. I can tell you that I've brought it to many school systems across the state. Generally speaking, and this is just a ballpark figure, we charge approximately $100 to $125 per educator that we train. It depends on how far away you are from us. There's a slight travel expense, but it's about $100 to $125 per educator. And of course, there's a minimum of like at least 6 teachers so that we don't have to travel real far away for one teacher. So it's pretty inexpensive.
And isn't it true, Nancy, that any school district could actually go to that site and download materials and information?
You absolutely. Just go to drugabuse.gov. You could download the information yourself.
Right.
If you're not interested in the training, you could absolutely go to drugabuse.gov and download the program yourself. That is correct. You could just eliminate me totally. It's just that I will give you my experience as an educator. I personally hated when someone dumped a new program on me and said, "Here, do this." If you just give me 2 hours of your time and a minimal amount of money, I'll have you up and running, no sweat. That's what I do, is I eliminate all the fuss. You're absolutely correct, Karen. You actually don't need me. You could do this without me.
Very well put. But I do have to also say that I was beyond impressed when I looked up those materials myself in terms of how much is out there that is just free for educators.
It's phenomenal. And a lot of it's online. They have all kinds of supporting materials. It's a great program. Right. That's why I was so impressed with it and why the report was so impressed with it as well. It's a great program. And I think what I also like about it, I would like to mention one more thing, if you don't mind. No. I was invited down. A lot of school systems still have DARE programs. Mm-hmm. And I would like to tell you that I was invited down to Dallas to DARE International this year to talk about how to integrate brain power with your current DARE program. DARE's program is more about teaching options and choices, and the brain power and the DARE program integrate beautifully together. A lot of school systems are reluctant to, shall we say, interfere with the DARE program that's currently in the school, because most school systems love their DARE officers. But these two programs integrate beautifully together. And I can tell you by the evaluation comments I got from the DARE officers that I spoke to, they think the two programs together would be a powerful way to go for a school system. So I will tell you that I got a lot of positive feedback from the DARE officers that I spoke to. They thought the two would integrate beautifully together. So I just wanted to throw that out there for school systems that have DARE officers in place. They integrate beautifully together.
Okay, that's a very excellent point. Here's another one, more technical. How long does it take for the brain to recover from addiction, and does it always recover?
Excellent question. The brain does not always recover, but about 80 to 85% of the time it does. And it depends on the drug that you're using. Generally speaking, when you stop using a drug, the brain is basically flatlining. It's numb. You don't feel emotion. You don't feel pain. You don't feel happiness after you've gotten past the obvious detoxification. It takes about 2 to 3 weeks, I'm being told, for that horrible, horrible, horrible part to really flatline on you, in about 3 months, I'm told, your body begins to recover and start producing normal neurotransmitters like dopamine again. I'm told that generally speaking, within a year, you'll start to feel normal joy again. I'm told that on average, within a couple of years, you can begin to feel normal happiness again. And this is why so many people relapse in that first year, because the recovery can take 1 to 2 years. And it's so difficult for folks to stick it out until the body is fully recovered. But there are some cases where the brain has been so severely damaged that those normal emotions just don't come back. But it is rare. Most people can fully recover.
Okay, thank you. Just one final question that's come in, and I'll tell the listeners you've got about 2 minutes if you want to send in a question. The final one that's come in is, why would a heroin addict take a drug that they know would kill them?
That is a difficult question, and for the longest time I puzzled about that myself. And the reason they're willing to take a chance is because the craving to get high, once the brain has become adult, they don't think like you and I think. Our brain thinks rationally. Once the brain is controlled by the drug, the brain is telling the body one thing: gotta get high, gotta get high, gotta get high. And if you remember me telling you that after a couple of years, they're not truly getting high anymore, they're just kind of taking a drug so that they don't get sick and to feel normal now. So they're willing to take a risk of taking a drug that could potentially kill them because they're chasing that high again. They want to feel that initial euphoria that they felt when they first started taking that drug. They're willing to risk it because they think they're going to get high again, which they haven't felt in quite a long time. That's why they're willing to risk it. The brain is diseased, it's not thinking clearly, and they think they're going to get high again. They just don't think like you and I do anymore.
Okay, thank you. That's very insightful. Nancy, if you could advance one more slide. So
okay, I'm sorry, I forgot.
No, that's fine.
Sorry.
So we've reached the end of the questions that have come in. We really hope all of you listeners have found this webinar useful and that you will participate in future PSI webinars. As always, you'll be receiving an email with information in the future. At the completion of this webinar, once we end it, you will immediately receive a survey. If you attended the webinar in its entirety and you submit a completed survey, you will receive a certificate of attendance from PSI. But please allow at least a week before expecting your certificate will be emailed to you. It will come via your email, the initial way that you received a notification of this. So once again, thank you, and thank you so much, Nancy. And if you have any further questions about PSI or any of our services, you can see our website right there or our phone number. So we appreciate your attendance today. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. Really enjoyed it.